most people intuitively get that the money rules and priorities are different for the rich than they are for lower and middle income people. But they don't know how those rules are different, how those priorities are different. So we're going to dive into that today and we'll go through a bunch of different levels of wealth and what the rules and priorities in the game are. So welcome to the Bucks Outside the Box show, where we challenge conventional money advice. We get a little contrarian and we try to just think outside the box about money. So let's dive right in. Level one is when you are totally broke, when you have a very low income. These are poor people, right? The actual poor people. But I mean, that's what the word means, right? Like that is literally what it means. At that level, I mean, you really have to just get good at two things. You have two priorities. One is just making more money, right? Like you have to figure out how to earn more money, how to level up your income. And whether that means, going and getting a better education or up-leveling your skill set, getting like an apprenticeship with, a skilled tradesperson like an electrician or a plumber or HVAC person, going to college or, getting an associate's degree in something that will actually pay a good salary when you
And a lot of it is, I have to interject, a lot of it is being creative. I went through this time period. I was a single mom with 4 little girls. I had no idea what we were going to do. And I was very lucky that I was creative. So we rented a house at that time and I ended up renting a room and getting childcare at the same time, which negated so many of my costs that I was able to start saving and doing the right things. So don't let your mind block you in. Get creative because there are creative ways.
Well, and that raises the second point of getting good at budgeting and stretching each dollar further. Because what you're talking about is savings. And that's the other thing here is getting really dialed in to budgeting and just stretching every dollar as far as it can possibly go. So if you're going to get out of level one, if you're going to get out of broke, you gotta figure out how to earn more money. You got to figure out budgeting and how to stretch every dollar to its absolute fullest. Like every penny counts, right? And then, to bring in one final point there about earning more money, it's not always about getting a new certification or a new degree or, any of those things. It can also be about getting on a career ladder that doesn't have a low ceiling, right? A career ladder that goes all the way to the top where you can advance up, relatively quickly if you put in the work, right? You put in the reps. So, Denny, you went into property management and you became a realtor and, there's no ceiling there, right? Like you can keep going up the ladder indefinitely. There are some jobs, like when you're working at McDonald's, like the ceiling is pretty low for most people, right? Like, so just finding a career track or a career ladder that doesn't have a ceiling, that keeps going up. And then, final thought here at level one, you want to build a small emergency fund, even if it's just like $500, so that, these small little things that go wrong in everyday life, right? I mean, things go wrong in everyday life, but when that stuff happens, that it doesn't completely derail you and, throw your life upside down when you get a $400 car repair or something that is relatively small, but that can completely derail you if you don't have any emergency fund at all. So that's level one, total broke, right? Level two, you are earning a little bit more money, but you're still on, maybe the lower end of middle class, or, sort of the higher end of lower class, or however you want to put that. Spending management, as you are earning a little bit more, don't go blow it on a new car or a new house or new clothes or dinners out, right? So, keep a lid on lifestyle inflation. So hold your spending, try to keep that as low as it was before when you were totally broke.
Right.
To build out a deeper emergency fund, right? Get up to $1,500 or get up to a 1 month living expenses. Stay out of consumer debt. That's also part of keeping that spending under control, keeping a lid on that, keeping a lid on lifestyle inflation.
They can really make it very appeasing, come over here. And so be careful.
Yeah. So, avoid payday lenders, avoid credit card debt, avoid the buy now, pay later, avoid consumer debt. And at this point, start investing, even if it's a tiny, tiny little bit of money. It's not really about the money at this point. It's about building the habit and learning how to use the systems, right? So that, if you talk to the average person who's totally broke, they wouldn't, even money aside, they were like, well, what's a brokerage account, right? Like, how do I even do that? So go to Charles Schwab, spend 5 minutes opening an account. I just use Charles Schwab as an example just because I personally use them, but Vanguard is another reputable example. There's a ton of them out there that, free brokerages. You can create an IRA, you can create a taxable brokerage account, simple stuff. Even if you were investing $10 a month. Like, it's not about the
Now,
money.
do they teach people what different investments are, classifications, stuff like that? Or is there a place somebody can go to learn that?
Oh, I mean, there are a million personal finance blogs out there. So even to this day, I actually do a little bit of freelance writing as a financial writer for Go Banking Rates. They have, thousands and thousands of articles on their blog all about, how to get started with investing and, like, what are some, simple index funds you can start with. So I'll give you two right now. If you are at this level, you want to start investing in stocks, you don't know what to invest in two: VTI and VEU. VTI is just a US broad market index fund. It includes small cap, large cap, and mid cap companies in it, just all across the spectrum, every industry. Just broad exposure to the US stock market. And VEU, same concept, but overseas, foreign international stocks across the emerging markets, developed markets, small, mid, large cap companies. So just broad exposure to the stock market as a whole, both within the US and internationally. VTI and VEU, and ideally open a Roth IRA at this level and invest money through that. And again, at this point, at this kind of like level 2, as we're calling it, it's not about the dollars and cents. It's about opening the account, getting comfortable with just the concept of it, and putting in, even if it's just a few dollars a month, just to get in that habit, right? All right, level 3, middle income. So what are your priorities here? What are the rules of the game here? So you want to start thinking about taxes at this point. At level 1, level 2, you're basically not paying tax at all by the federal government. And you're paying things like sales taxes to your state government stuff. But the bottom 50% or so of percentile of income, people in the United States pay no effective income tax. Like it gets all like offset with tax credits and stuff. So, but you get to middle income and you do want to start thinking about taxes, not the way that you do at the higher echelons, but maxing out an IRA, it makes sense. Start researching tax credits so that you can pay $0 in federal income taxes effectively, like people who are at the lower levels are doing.
And this is all about growth and achieving each level and getting to the next level.
Yeah,
So these things help.
This is sort of what you should be thinking about at each level here, right? Get a little bit more serious about investing. You can still go it alone at this level, but you can start thinking about adding real estate to your portfolio. I mean, this is what Denny and I do in the co-investing club every month. We get together as an investment club. We vet passive real estate investments. And then any of our members who like an investment can go in on it with $5,000 or more, instead of the typical 50 or 100 grand. Like we're investing in like rich person investments, but we're doing it as a club so that not all of our members have to be rich to do it, right? Like middle income people can participate in this.
And you're learning. You're
the new
learning
minimum.
from so many different people.
Yeah.
So it also is a teaching.
Absolutely. And so start learning a little bit more about investing in general, real estate, like Denny just said, stocks as well. You can consider buying a home at this level, right? In that middle income level, a lot of people buy a home. So these are the kind of things that, people start thinking about at that middle income level. And, as they
consider house hacking.
Consider house hacking.
When you buy your home.
Yeah, buy a multifamily property, rent out the other units so that their rents cover the entire mortgage. You move into the other unit, or you can do that with bedrooms. I mean, Denny, you and I have both rented out bedrooms. You told that story earlier in this episode, actually. Yeah, when I bought my first house, I rented out a bedroom, and it covered 3/4 of my mortgage payment. Yeah,
we took in a foreign exchange student, and that paid half of our mortgage.
Yeah, exactly. So get creative with it. But these are sort of what middle income people are thinking about, some of their priorities. Now you get to like middle plus income, like people who are more comfortable. They're not upper middle class yet, but they're sort of more comfortable middle income people. Here you can start considering bringing in expert help, bringing in a CPA to help you do your taxes and give you like tax strategy advice, talking to a financial advisor, fee only, probably like, you pay them a flat fee for like an hour of their time just to talk to, you don't have to pay, don't have them manage your investments for you at this level, but, just get some advice, some expert financial planning advice. Add real estate to your portfolio at this point. That comes with a lot of tax advantages. We're not going to dig into that today. We've done a lot of episodes about those, and we'll do plenty more, I'm sure, in the future. But passive real estate investments, like what we invest in, you get that nice juicy depreciation to offset any other investment income that you have. Get more serious about building passive income streams. You want to start adding these streams of income so that you're not quite so dependent on your day job. At this point, you're going to be early in that process, but you just want to start building out those income streams. And again, half of what we do, most of the investments we look at in the co-investing club pay a nice party income stream. At this point where you're in that sort of comfortable middle plus income level, you can switch out of that spreadsheet budgeting where like every
Right.
line item, just down to the penny. You can switch out of that. You can do more like bucket budgeting or rule-based budgeting. And I'll give a quick example. My wife and I spent 10 years living overseas, and she was earning a teacher's salary. She was working at international schools. She was a school counselor, but same income level as a teacher. And she had good benefits with it, but very modest income. So we aimed to live entirely on her income and benefits and to save and invest all of my income. So we didn't have a spreadsheet for a budget. Like we weren't like counting out like how much we're spending on this versus that. And, we just had it was sort of a rule-based budget where, if we found ourselves spending more than what she was earning every month, we reined it in and spent less next month and to catch that up. Right. Well, all of my money, we were aiming to save and invest. So, that kind of rules-based budgeting is much harder when you're broke or when you're at the lower income levels. You really do need to stretch every single dollar as far as it can possibly go at those lower income levels. You get to the comfortable, like middle plus income level, and it's less about like stretching every single dollar than it is about just having rules that make sure that keep you within the guardrails, right? Of like, still
Well, you
setting
want to get
aside
out of
as
that
much income as possible.
spend mentality
Right.
that
Yeah.
so many people are at.
Right. You want to set aside a savings rate, a percentage of your income that goes towards savings and investments. You want to protect that savings rate. Find a rules system that helps you keep that savings rate in place. You don't necessarily have to count every dollar at this level. And, at this point, it's worth talking about parenting a little bit and, teaching kids about money, because at this level, the comfortable plus level of like middle income people, kids, parents start spoiling their kids a little bit more. They stop saying no as much because at middle income and lower, parents just say, no, we can't afford it. Right. And that's the end of the discussion. You start getting into like comfortable middle plus level, and parents can afford it. So they often do. So they start, just buying more stuff for their kids and just saying, oh yeah, sure, whatever. Kids need to hear the word no. And
Yes.
and look, I mean, this is something I struggle with. I have a 5-year-old, and for my wife, she would spoil the hell out of our daughter. So I have to sometimes be the Grinch and be like, no. And there's a line that, I can't take credit for this. I heard, another financial podcaster was talking about this, and they're basically saying the line goes from no, we can't afford it, to no, just because we can afford it doesn't mean it's a priority to us, right?
Right.
And
I
we
like
don't,
that.
yeah, and we don't want to fill up our house with stuff either. We have enough stuff. You have enough toys. We're not going to buy another toy just for the sake of like filling up our house with more stuff, right?
You can always tell your kids to call grandma.
Yeah, right. That's true. Because grandparents are
kidding.
always suckers for that stuff. So anyway, that's sort of level 4. That's like comfortable middle plus income. Level 5, upper middle class income. And this is really people in that like the top 5 to 20th percentile, is really who we're talking about here. At this point, you're getting more serious about tax strategies, right? Like taxes start eating up a bigger chunk of your income. So you got to get more strategic about minimizing your tax bill. Budgeting here, again, it's not about crunching numbers. It's not about watching every dollar. It's now about funneling as much of that income as you can into investments and building passive income streams. So, you're not crunching spreadsheets as much at this point, or really
Right.
not budgeting spreadsheets. At this point, your spreadsheets are probably about investments, right? And, so I have a spreadsheet tracking my net worth. I also track my net worth through Credit Karma, which is a free platform to do it. It's not as perfect as Mint was back in the day, but they discontinued Mint. But yeah, it's not about like crunching every dollar with your budget. It's more about like, how can I funnel as much of my income as possible into investments that will compound over time, into investments that will pay hearty passive income streams for me to make me less dependent on my day job, because that is really a risk here. As you get into these upper income levels, a lot of times people will keep spending in the similar way that like middle income people spend, where like their whole life revolves around their day job, around this one like W-2 job. But that makes you really vulnerable to.
And you're dependent.
Yeah. But at that point, you're spending so much more money, right? And oftentimes those expenses are not easily cut back on, right? People who are like level 2, they're just above broke or like that lower middle income level, like they can probably like cut back pretty easily. You get to like upper middle class and you've got massive expenses, but you're probably still too dependent on your job. If something happens to your job, you're in real trouble. Or your business, if you have a business. Denny, you and I have been in business together for 10 years now, if you can believe that. But yeah, businesses are up and down, right? Like the revenue's up and down. So you need to start diversifying your income so that you're not so dependent on that one active stream of income. You want to protect yourself from, these kinds of shocks. And one way of putting this, sort of reframing that argument that we were just making, you can make a lot of money through concentration, through your job or through having like one good run of crypto, investments or whatever, but you keep and you grow your money through diversification. And this is what you and I do every month in the co-investing club. We are out there vetting new passive real estate investments and each putting like small amounts in these. All the members in the co-investing club, they're putting relatively small amounts in these to diversify. And again, yes, you can make a lot of money from one thing, but that leaves you vulnerable to that one thing, right? Like think about all the crypto millionaires who went broke.
I always use this example, but it's the eggs in one basket. And if you do that and that basket drops, you're done.
Right. So yes, you can make a lot of money through concentration. Look at all the crypto millionaires and then they went broke, right? Like you keep the money and you grow the money through diversification. And it's the same thing with your job. You can make a lot of money doing XYZ job, right? But what happens when that job gets automated away to AI, right? Like, and, or whatever, or, something happens to your business that disrupts it, and that is where diversification comes in. It helps you keep your wealth, helps you build out those other passive income streams. And, you want to start hedging at this point. You want to start hedging against those unlikely but devastating risks as well. And I'll give a quick example. A good friend of mine is a financial planner, and she just got back from 2 weeks in Uruguay with her dad. They were down there, and she was scouting out a place to set up a second home and a second brokerage account, and to diversify against the unlikely but possible scenario of something catastrophic happening in the U.S. Again, no one, if she were here, she would say, yeah, no, it's totally unlikely that the U.S. will get involved in a massive war or, something catastrophic would happen here, or that the U.S. would implement capital controls or have like a socialist or a fascist government, come in and put all these capital controls in place and restrict the money you can take out of the country. It's like all that stuff is unlikely, right? It's very unlikely, but that would be catastrophic for wealthy people who can no longer move their money out of the country, right? So she's like, I'm going to move a minority of my money to Uruguay. I'm going to set up a brokerage account there. She's talking about maybe buying a modest piece of real estate there. And because she's at that upper middle class level where she's starting to hedge against these unlikely but devastating risks and, to protect herself against what may come, whatever that is. Because we
look at the world around us. We don't know anymore.
There's always going to be some kind of crisis. You just can't predict exactly what that crisis will be, right?
Right.
All right. So upper middle class families really have to watch out for this and for raising their kids with that entitlement mindset. And I saw this firsthand in my own family where my parents had me and my sister when they were young, when they were in their 20s. And through my child, and then they got divorced. And throughout my childhood, my parents were very like middle class, like middle of the road middle class. They were at that level 3 that we were talking about earlier. They eventually got remarried when they were older, and they had a second round of children who are much, much, much younger than my sister and me. So my half brothers are 15 and 18 years younger. My half sister is 17 years younger than me. And my half siblings grew up in that level 5, upper middle class lifestyle. They went to very expensive private schools, surrounded by rich kids. They drove, their parents were driving luxury cars and bought them cars when they turned 16. And like when I was 16, my mom she let me have her 16-year-old Ford Escort station wagon. And I was lucky to have it, right? Like I was lucky to have any car. And I felt lucky to have it. My younger siblings, they were like, well, why doesn't it have, the heated seats, like, But and that's the risk, right? Is upper middle class families, they have to watch out. They have to actively guard against that because their kids are going to be rubbing shoulders with snotty, entitled rich kids. They're probably going to be spoiled, And my dad and his wife, my stepmom, they have 2 second homes. And my little brothers grew up going to those 2 second homes every summer and wondering, well, why don't we have a third home? You know what I mean? So this is something you really have to guard against as an upper middle class parent, and you also have to teach your kids about budgeting because,
Yes.
so then they have to learn that from the bottom, right? So even though maybe you are at that level 5, that upper middle class family, and you're not budgeting on a spreadsheet, your kids are going to need to know how to budget from a spreadsheet, right? Like they need to know this stuff.
And schools do not teach
That's
this
right.
stuff.
That's right.
Kids will learn calculus, but they're not going to learn how to manage money.
And you want to teach them budgeting. You want to teach them investing. You want to teach them tax strategies, right? Teach them this stuff explicitly. Don't leave it unsaid. A lot of parents, they don't know how to talk about money. Learn how to talk about money. I mean, there are so many books out there and blogs and podcasts specifically geared towards parents, teaching them how to teach their own kids about money. So something to watch out for. Like avoid the entitlement mindset and dig in deeper with the hard skills of budgeting, tax strategies, investing, etc. All right, level 6, the truly wealthy, right? So these are people, in the top 5% percentile of wealth in the United States. And we're kind of drawing arbitrary numbers here just to kind of illustrate the point. At this point, tax strategies are not everything, but they're really crucial, right? Because otherwise you can lose all your money to the government if you're not careful. Diversification is equally crucial. I mean, it is about protecting yourself against shocks from whatever direction they come from. Shock in the real estate market, good thing you have such a diversified stock portfolio. Stock market crash, good thing you have such a diversified real estate portfolio, right? And probably some bonds and some private debt investments and, maybe a sprinkling of crypto and a sprinkling of commodities and so forth. That diversification is crucial. So in our co-investing club, we do have a lot of middle income people who are investing $2,500 in the investments that we make. We also have a lot of wealthy people who are investing 50 grand a pop in these. And we're looking at these every month, sometimes twice a month. So, it is a spread and the amounts differ, but the strategy that is somewhat consistent here among the upper echelons is diversify your investment. Among the wealthy, you're at level 6, legacy becomes a really big priority. How do I make sure that my kids end up having a safe or a stable, financially comfortable life, but not just living off their trust funds, right? I mean, you can create a trust fund, of course, but you want to equip them with the tools to go out and have success on their own terms, right? To go out and do meaningful work in the world, be well compensated for it, to know how to make their own way and not just to raise spoiled brats like we talked about a minute ago. So, you want to arm your kids with the tools that they need to be successful on their own terms, to go out and do meaningful work and be successful at it and to work hard and to enjoy working hard, right? That's hard. That's easier said than done. And there are a lot of books out there to help you do it, right? And a lot of advisors to help you do it and blogs and podcasts and all that good stuff. But there was a famous study, and it's a couple of decades old at this point, but it still gets referenced every time this topic comes up. And that the study found that among decamillionaire families, or at least families who would be decamillionaires today, this was millionaire families back in the day, which now would be like a decamillionaire, someone with 10 million or more. But among these very wealthy families, 90% of those families were broke or back to middle class within 3 generations. So first generation made the money, second generation blew the money as spoiled brats, right? And the third generation, by the grandkids, money's gone. They're back to being middle class and they don't have the tools they need to go out and succeed anymore because their parents didn't teach them that, because their parents were the spoiled brat children of the grandparents who made all the money. And those grandparents who made all the money, they wanted to spoil their children. They're like, oh, well, I grew up in hardship or I grew up middle class or whatever, and I never had these things. So I want to just, spoil the hell out of my children and give them all the things that I never had. You're doing them a disservice by doing that, right? Give them some hardship, right? I mean, not like starvation hardship, but give them some hardship. Send them off to volunteer in Guatemala for a week, right? With a safe and reputable organization, of course. But go, send them off to do volunteer work and get their hands dirty. Send them to public schools, if the public school is good quality. This is
It
something to
is.
watch out for.
I think it's good, one, because it teaches kids how to give, which they should, but it
Absolutely.
also teaches them that there are people that are way worse off. And if you don't take care of your own self and not just depend on everything, that you could end up there too. And it was one of the things that I used to do with my kids. I would take them because, kids always complain, why do we have to live here or whatever it is? And I was a big one on showing them that it can always be worse.
That's true.
And then that gives them a better mindset of the reality, and then the desire, oh, I need to do better.
Right. Like, kids think that whatever they see every day, that's normal. But
Right.
if all they see are gated communities and, private schools, where everybody's rich, they think that that's normal. They think that's average. And they think that that's what they should expect from. So to your point, Denny, you have to give them that perspective and show them, no, we are incredibly fortunate. This is how most people in the world live. When you're at that wealthy level, it's about legacy. It is about tax strategies, and it's about diversification, really, at that. Now, at every level across the board, to kind of tie this together, you want to surround yourself with people who are at the next level up the ladder than you are. And not 2 levels up, by the way, because then it's unattainable. It feels like too much. Or even a half level up the ladder. But it really, you want to surround yourself with people who are 1 level up that ladder than you are, because they will help pull you up, and they will give you some of the mindset and that those people at that level are thinking about, and start expressing sort of these financial rules and priorities, so that you can start kind of have those be bubbling through your subconscious, instead of the stuff that people either at your own level or, God forbid, like down a level lower, they're going to hold you back because they are thinking, lower income thoughts. Like
Right.
and they're approaching this from a lower income mentality, often with more of a hand to mouth mentality. People at these upper levels are thinking much more in longer term time frames, right? Like they're laying a foundation for decades in the future with their investments and so forth. So surround yourself with people who are at that next level up from you, and they will help pull you up to that level. And it takes intentionality, and it takes a lot of work to climb that ladder. And most people don't really climb the ladder. They'll climb 1 or 2 rungs on the ladder at most, and they'll kind of level off. If you want to climb to the top of the ladder, or at least to get to that upper middle class level, it takes a lot of intentionality. And, I'll give one final
And persistence.
and persistence. Absolutely. That's a theme that gets hammered into us by our business coach. But that's why we hired this business coach, right? To pull us up to the next level, because he is at that next level. And we want him to help us get to the next level, right? So this is why we hired him. And I joined a mastermind group a couple of years ago of people who are either millionaires or, becoming millionaires, because I wanted to become a millionaire, right? So I went out of my way and I paid money, a lot of money, to surround myself with this group of people who are the next level up from me, to help pull me up to that level, to help me like pull myself up to that level. So yeah, it takes work. It takes intentionality. Denny, anything else you want to cover before we call this episode complete?
I just think the other thing is, just to tie in the club, is that's a great way to prepare your children. We have a lot of people who do that with trusts, and they'll invest with a trust, and you spread the wealth, and it's passive. So
Yeah,
you're
well, and
not doing more
that's a
work.
wonderful point. That so in our co-investing club, you are surrounding yourself with people who are better investors than you are, more sophisticated investors than you are, and of course, we have plenty of newbies in there too. But they get the benefit of group vetting these big investments, alongside very experienced, knowledgeable investors, and that helps them level up themselves, not just from an investing standpoint, but like you said,
Right.
some of these people are investing through self-directed IRAs or through LLCs where their children are members of the LLC, so that if they got hit by a bus tomorrow, like their grown children or teenage children would just take over. It's one more way to surround yourself with people who are a level up, and in a much cheaper way than like a mastermind group, like what I did. Yeah, our co-investing club is $59 a month. So much cheaper than the thousands and thousands I spent on that mastermind group. Guys, if you got a fresh perspective from this episode, subscribe to the show, pay it forward to someone else, pass along to anyone else who you think might get something out of this. And if you didn't get anything out of this episode, let us know. Support at sparkrental.com. Let us know what you want to hear more of or less of, or give us feedback. We read every one of those emails. And lastly, consider joining us in the co-investing club. And if you're not familiar with passive real estate investments like syndications and private notes and private partnerships and equity funds, debt funds, we have a free course on that. sparkrental.com/free. Check it out. 8 episodes are all super quick and punchy, like 10 minutes or less a piece. And on that note, stay weird, unconventional investor.